I don't think any game has captured the sensory delights of cooking better than Venba. A primitive part of my brain relaxes when I hear the sound of oil sputtering and cackling as food is lowered into a hot pan. The accompanying rush of steam teases me further. Perhaps, if I get close enough to my monitor, I'll smell what's cooking through the screen. The delights of home cooking are on full display here. The space is frequently filled with the craggled edges of deep-fried goodness and the sunset colours of spiced rice, all garnished with the emeralds and rubies of coriander and chilies. These are the sights and sounds that are granted personal and spiritual significance throughout the story of Venba, an Indian mother who uses cooking to bring her closer to the people she loves and to celebrate her culture. In oh so many words, what I'm trying to say is that Venba gets food. This is remarkable because most games about cooking don't really dwell on food's purpose or what it represents to an individual. Instead, typical cooking games look more like this.
We're firing! 76 beefs, 34 chickens, okay? 12 french fries, 12 mash, fucking now!
Games like Overcooked and Cooking Simulator broadly fit into what I'd call the stressy restaurant genre of games. In small doses, they're entertaining and successfully capture the pressures of working in a high-end kitchen. But cooking in these games always feels like a job. Before I'm even halfway through a mission, I already can't wait for my next cigarette break out by the bins. I bust my ass to expedite food from fridge to flame to front of house. But I never get the sense that my food is out there making an impression on people's lives. In Overcooked, I'm rewarded with coins from mostly invisible customers. In Cooking Simulator, I place a meal in a dumbwaiter. Then a report card pops up remarking on how well I did, how much cash I earned, and how many notches my fame bar climbed. These games don't celebrate food. They worship the capitalist hustle of endlessly replicating soulless menu items to watch arbitrary numbers skyrocket. Work yourself to the bone, and if you can't take the heat, stay out of the kitchen. A couple of Japanese RPGs are on the right lines though. They occasionally include longing looks at photorealistic foods. They're here not simply as a graphical flex, but as a valiant attempt to communicate how good food can feed the soul. Godly grub doesn't simply replenish a character's HP, it can inspire them, often in the form of a temporary buff to raise their attributes. This all falls apart somewhat once you realise that any gorgeously rendered meal can be replaced by a JPEG of a potion. As long as they provide the same status benefits, their physical form factor makes very little difference when you're shopping for buffs. I get it though. Food needs a tangible function in games that's easy to communicate to players. Food is fuel after all. But what video games have a tough time doing over foodie films like Ratatouille, Babette's Feast and Tampopo is get to the heart of what food can accomplish spiritually, for both the chef and the diner. And 1996's Big Night perhaps conveys this concept best. The film is about a pair of Italian brothers in the 50s who open a restaurant in America, but is slowly losing customers. In an effort to rejuvenate interest in their dying business, the brothers plan to host a dinner party to re-demonstrate their culinary prowess to the community. They invite influential people, then devise an exquisite menu and meticulously consider everything for the feast. But the centerpiece of the meal is decidedly a timpano.
What is that?
It's timpano. It's a secret recipe that they brought from their hometown.
Which is a kind of super lasagna that takes an immense amount of time and care to prepare, as demonstrated in a wonderful montage where we watch the brothers collaboratively mix up dough before slicing and hand-rolling individual tubes of pasta. And that's just step one. Once out of the oven, the pair lovingly twist the baking tin away as though they were tentative children unveiling a grand sandcastle. Cutting open a timpano is an event, so it's taken to be served tableside, much to the delight of the diners, who take deep, pleasured pauses after their first taste. But just before bringing it to the table, the brothers spend a moment with their creation. Their hands caress the food before leaning in to drum their fingers on the surface, as if to touch their past and lose themselves in the smells and sounds of home and the kitchens from their yesteryears. Stanley Tucci, who not only starred in Big Night, but also co-wrote and co-directed the project, recalls in his recent memoir, Taste, that timpano was a Christmas staple in his household. While he acknowledges how labour-intensive the prep can be, his book includes a 1,500-word recipe for it in its own dedicated chapter. In his eyes, the dish came to symbolise the lengths you go to express your love to your friends and family. Tucci muses, For all its trouble, it was probably the best fucking Christmas gift of all. It goes without saying that Timpano certainly made an impression on him, and he wanted to share that in this film.
This is so fucking good, I should kill you.
What Big Night and all these other films do about food especially well is demonstrate how cooking can be one of the most humble and spiritual things you can do for another person. Your passions, your expertise, and your time are all being shared with the people you cherish through the loving act of cooking. There's an undeniable amount of beauty and humanity in these films, and it's all on display in that holy moment whenever we see someone cooking with sincere thoughtfulness, or a diner blissfully savouring every mouthful. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that these films get food, and Venba gets food too. Cooking in Venba never serves to increase stats for NPCs. Rather, it uses its food to tell its story about an Indian couple who emigrated to Canada in the 80s. While homely, their apartment is decidedly small, but it's the best the pair can afford given their limited sources of income, which is about to get stretched even further as Venba stirs with the early signs of pregnancy. To comfort her home and morning sickness, she reaches for her mother's old cookbook, which is packed with recipes from her home region of Tamil. Once she sets off to cook a dish though, Venba discovers that the family recipe book can only be charitably described as well loved. Many of the pages are damaged, faded, or splattered with sauce, rendering following the instructions, often the most pivotal parts, a tricky task. Deciphering the missing words is the crux of the gameplay here. Logic will help, but just like in real cooking, success comes through rigorous trial and error. This is the game's way of saying that only learned experience can teach you the optimal way to layer a biryani, or the secret to extracting maximum flavour from tamarind. As the years roll past, Venba eventually returns the tattered book to the shelf, so time spent in the kitchen becomes akin to Cooking Mama-style minigames, but not in a derivative way, as a means to show how these recipes have become second nature. When Venba's cooking, she's not simply preparing a meal, she's adopting the techniques that have been passed down to her to faithfully recreate the smells and tastes she associates with home. Dropping exotic ingredients into hot oil always yields loud, satisfying sizzles, and throwing spices into pots feels like hurling paint powder at holy festivals. Food like this is a celebration of culture, and it serves to reconnect Venba with her family history, but also to instill a sense of pride and national identity to her son, Kevin. Born in Toronto, Kevin is a second-generation immigrant who attends an English-speaking school. Because his tastes and interests are so westernized, Venba quietly fears estrangement from him, especially once his language becomes as taxing to understand as her old cookbook. Kevin himself spends most of his early life embarrassed by the Indian side of his identity. He refrains from eating his packed lunches in front of his school friends as he fears how they'd react. And during a heated dinner debate before moving away to university, he explains how this is finally a fresh start for him. He no longer has to shoulder the burden of smelling like Little India. To him, Venba's food has no connotations of home or history. It's solely a source of shame. Before leaving home for good, Kevin promises he'll visit often and call every week. A hollow promise that Venba is all too familiar with after leaving her own parents back in India. In a starkly truthful moment, you're invited to scroll through the texting history between mother and son, which is often uncomfortably one-sided. Venba's warm wishes of good morning and good night are willfully ignored by Kevin, minus some begrudging, low-effort responses on special occasions. I think we're all a little ashamed to admit that we've all been Kevin at some point in our lives. Despite being generations apart, Venba and Kevin have each walked a similar path through life. They each leave home in an effort to achieve new starts, and both later seek to reconnect with their family roots. The recipe book helps bridge that transition in both instances. In fact, Venba sees it as her duty to repair it, so future generations can enjoy its contents. Later in life, Kevin eventually finds himself using that old cookbook to recreate a traditional chicken soup. The smells and sound of cooking catches him off guard and makes him nostalgic. That tiny apartment we see so frequently in establishing shots throughout the game builds up a mental portfolio of what he ends up remembering. The signature whistle of a pressure valve, the familiar aromas of fried meats, and the music wafting from the faithful kitchen radio. I'm sure that every one of us has a dish that reminds us of home, And this game knows that by recreating a meal, you bring with it all the memories of the places and the people that made that food so significant. Each in-game chapter is framed around a meal that ultimately becomes synonymous with a core family memory. These are the times Kevin is reminded of when he flicks through the cookbook, as he begins to appreciate the cultural value of the food, and more importantly, the person who cooked all those meals for him. Venba knows that cooking is an expression of love, but it also understands that recipes are so much more than just a few bullet points on a page. They are mimetic, capable of connecting us to our history and preserving it for future generations. The ever-sophisticated Stanley Tucci puts it best. Perhaps the most precious heirlooms are family recipes. Like a physical heirloom, they remind us of whom and where we came, and give others, in a bite, the story of another people, from another place and another time. Recipes embody the values and wisdom the author has accrued throughout their time on Earth. As you follow the instructions on the page, you step into their shoes and retrace their movements through the kitchen. You handle the same ingredients, boil and fry for the same amount of time, and savour the simple tastes they fell in love with. By following their recipes, you join a long line of people who yearn for the honest pleasure of watching someone smile as they take their first mouthful of home cooking. Venba knows that sharing and eating good food isn't just a love language, it's part of our DNA. It's a game about peeking into the past and brushing the grime away from a family's history book, so you can learn to recreate dishes and reconnect with the people and places that you hold dear. In short, Venba gets food.